Hello, in this video we're going to talk about insert mesh brushes, insert multi-mesh, and insert mesh along a curve. So we've touched a bit on insert mesh brushes in the context of Dynamesh in an earlier tutorial. But that's the case where we're taking organic parts, drawing them and merging them together. And we're not going to do that here. We want these to be separate mechanical pieces. So to do this, if we zoom into this character here, you can see that there's actually quite a bit of interesting stuff happening along curves here. These blades were drawn using blades duplicated along a curve. That was an insert mesh brush. The stitches running down these gloves are insert meshes. These straps are insert meshes along a curve. So let's take a look at how we actually do this. I'm going to go to the light box and open up a polysphere. I'm going to go to the brush menu, select I for insert, and let's select the Imm industrial parts brush. And now we get all these industrial parts up here. I'll select a Phillips head screw, and then I'll try and draw it on the sphere, and it says it can't do it because there's multiple subdivision levels. Now we didn't run into this with Dynamesh because Dynamesh doesn't have subdivisions. So that means I have to come over here and delete my lower levels. Now I can click and drag, and it will draw those screw heads. If I want the screw heads to draw the same size every time I draw them, set your size using your brush draw size here. Click and drag and then press the control key and it will snap it to the same size every time. So just start drawing the brush and then press the control key and it will snap to the same size. So that's very, very handy because trying to manually kind of guess the same size for each screw is always a real pain. So how can we create our own insert brush? Notice that when we draw this mesh, it always sort of grows from the same spot. It grows from the bottom out. So what we need to do is we need to create an object that we want to use as an insert mesh and then orient it and store it so it grows out of the model in the way that we want when we use our brush stroke. So let's take a look at how we can do that. I'm going to go to the gizmo and let's go to the deformers here. With our deformers, let's go ahead and turn on the symmetry here for Y. Let's squash this down. Here we go. And once we're happy with that, we'll go ahead and accept. Now I'm going to go to B for brush, C for clip, and I'm going to select clip circle center. It says that it's going to replace my control shift keys. That's fine. That's usually my visibility marquee, but now I'm going to get this. I'm going to use the space bar to place this curve, and then I'm just going to let go, and that's going to trim the outermost edge. I'm going to turn off X symmetry and do that again. Control shift click and drag, use the space bar to place it, then let go and it'll trim the edges off and give us a nice hard edge there. Let's go back to the gizmo. This time we'll select the deformer flatten and let's go ahead and flatten the bottom there. Perfect. Click the gizmo and accept. So now we've got the beginnings of a nice screw head. We're going to do a hex nut, the type of thing you might put IKEA furniture together with. So we're going to use live booleans for this. Now we have a whole chapter just on live boolean, but I thought it would be nice to touch on it here. So I'm going to go to Subtool, Append, or actually let's just do this. Let's duplicate this piece. I'm going to go to the gizmo. I'm going to replace it with polycylinder. Let's go ahead and rotate this polycylinder. Let's accept that. Let's rotate it around 90 degrees. Let's scale it down. And move it forward. Now I'm going to set this subtool to subtract right here under the subtool menu. Now if I turn on live boolean, you see it actually subtracts. So I get that nice sense of a kind of a hex nut head. And I can change the size of it just by scaling. There we go. Now I want to turn this into an insert mesh brush. To do that I need to bake this down into its own bit of geometry. Right now it's a live Boolean. I want to just bake this into geometry. So to do that, I go to the Subtool menu, go to Boolean, and click Make Boolean Mesh. It'll start to think about it up here, and once it's finished, I'll have a new tool under the Z-Tool menu called UMesh, which is essentially a remeshed version of this Boolean that's all baked down into geometry. Here it is there. If we go into frame mode, you can see that that's now actual geometry. So if we want to make this into an insert mesh, we need to think about the orientation on screen here. The background of your document window, think of that like the surface of the model. However I store the position here is how this brush will grow out of the surface of the model. So let's place it like this and go to Brush, Create Insert Mesh, and let's append it to the one that we've already got. So now look at this. I select it, click and drag, and it grows out of the surface just like those other nuts and bolts. Now if I had stored it this way, Brush, Insert Mesh, Append, now it's going to grow this way out of the surface, which is not really what we want in this case, but it might be for other types of shapes. If I want to control the depth, like right there it's sitting on top of the surface, right there. If I want to countersink it, go to the brush menu, go to the depth controls, and then bring this down. That black line represents the surface of the model, and the black dot is the center of the brush. So there you can see that countersinks it. So that's how we can create our own insert mesh brush and then append it into an existing IMM or create a new mesh brush entirely. So let's look now at how we can create insert brushes that function along a curve instead of just drawing and inserting themselves into a mesh and one unit at a time. So let's reset our user interface and take a look at that. So now let's take a look at a different type of insert mesh. This mesh is an insert mesh that functions along a curve rather than drawing a single instance. So for example, here on this character, you can see that I've got these razor blade wings. These are accomplished using an insert mesh brush along a curve. Each one of these blades is just duplicated along the curve and merged together. We've also got the same thing happening here with the straps, as well as the stitches running along the length of the gloves. These are all insert mesh brushes that are in curve mode. They're drawing along a curve. Also, these teeth inside the body here, it's the same principle. These are all inserted along a curve. So let's take a look at how we actually do this. I'm going to go ahead and create a new sphere, draw it on the canvas, and then go into edit mode. Turn on X symmetry, and let's go ahead and make kind of a shark's tooth. Let's squash this. Let's use our modifiers with a bend arc here. Oops, we need to delete our subdivision levels. We'll delete our lower levels. We'll go into customize and use a bend arc. Let's go ahead and bend this. Oops. There we go. Get a nice curvature to that. Go ahead and click the gear and accept. Go back to our standard brush. And let's change to alpha 1. I just want to get just a sense of some surface detail on here. Go with our pinch brush. Let's create a nice edge here and a point. And let's give some serrated edges on this just to make it extra wicked. We'll pull out little serrations here and a nice point. Go to our damn standard brush. We're working with very few subdivision levels here, so let's divide one more time. Just give it some striations. Don't want to make it look too much like a Christmas tree. Cool. So here we go. We've got a nice kind of a shark's tooth here. Let's go ahead and stretch it up just to make it a little bit more wicked. There we go. And just for the sake of detail, let's go ahead and put some more detail on the back side here. Using our damn standard brush, just add some striations to the back. Great, there we go. So this will be our shark's tooth. Now, I want to create a new insert mesh brush that will draw a single shark's tooth. But I need to remember how I want it to grow out of the surface. I don't want it to grow like this because that doesn't make sense. If we're drawing along a gum line, we want these teeth to actually grow out of the gum line, and they're not going to if we draw them like this because they're going to grow like they're laying flat on the surface. We want to grow them like this. Now, because this is going to be linked to a curve, we're not going to draw a single instance. It's going to duplicate along a curve. Now, when you're creating a brush that duplicates along a curve, it looks something like this. I'm going to go ahead and load up a demo brush that I created. This is a skull chain brush. You can see that this brush duplicates along a curve. It replicates this skull and chain along the length of that curve. So when we store our object position, we need to make sure that we take advantage or take into account the direction of the curve. So the curve in ZBrush runs from the top of the screen to the bottom. So if I store my tooth like this, it will duplicate like this along the curve. So here I'll show you. I'm going to go to Brush, Create Insert Mesh, make it a new brush. So now its default behavior is this. I need to delete my lower subdivision levels so I can draw it on here. There you see, the tooth grows straight out of the surface. Now I want it to duplicate along a curve. To do that, I go to the Stroke menu, go to Curve Mode, turn it on. Now, let me bring that menu down so you can see Curve Mode right there is turned on. When I click and drag, it duplicates those teeth along the curve. There you see. Let's draw that again. There you see we're duplicating those teeth along a curve. Let's go ahead and grab a sphere. Let's delete our lower subdivision levels, and we'll draw this along the curve. There you see those teeth are growing out from the curve. If I turn up my brush size, click the curve, it'll increase the size of the teeth. Now they're sitting kind of on the surface. Since they're teeth, I want them to be countersunk. So I'm going to go to the brush menu, I'm going to go to the depth control, and I'm going to turn this down. That black line is the surface of the model, and the black dot is the center of the brush. So if we draw it like this, and then click the curve, it'll update the depth. So now those teeth feel like they're really embedded in the surface. We could probably turn them up just a bit, just so we get a little more sense of the root of the tooth. There we go. So that's better. So now we've got this nice curve with these teeth on it. Now, if I want to extend the curve, I just mouse down towards the end of it, like this, until I get that little red line there. Click and drag, and that will continue my curve. Oops, let's do this again. There you go. That continues the curve. If I want to move the curve around, all I need to do is just click and drag on one of the endpoints, and I can drag this curve around. So if I click this endpoint and drag, it moves the curve. If I click and drag along the length of the curve while my brush is blue, I can change the direction of the curve like this. As I mouse over the curve, my brush turns blue. That just lets me know that I'm in curve edit mode. When I mouse away, my brush turns red. So if I change my draw size here and click the curve, I can change the size of those teeth. If I click and drag the curve while my cursor is blue, then I'm just editing the curve. Now, if I want the curve to wrap entirely around a surface, start drawing a curve like this, then press and hold the Shift key, and it will snap that curve in a circle around that surface, which is really good for making bracelets or costume elements that wrap around a body part. So let's turn the size of those teeth up just by increasing my draw size on the brush and then tapping the curve. So there you see we've got a ring of teeth that goes all the way around that sphere. If I click, just tap on the sphere, that clears the curve. I can clear my mask, and now those have been inserted. Those have inserted into the same mesh. These are not subtools. This is an insert mesh brush. It's just functioning along a curve. So you can see how we can very easily use these to draw spines down the back of a creature. We can use them to add teeth. Let's take a look now at how to create something that's a repeating tool. And by a repeating tool, I mean something like this skull brush that we've got here, the skull chain brush, which if you look at it, it's not separate pieces connecting or not separate pieces drawing along a curve. These individual pieces are connecting The chain is seamlessly connected as we go down the length of the stroke. So if we go back to the angel here, you can see that these straps that we made and the knives that we made, these are not separate pieces along a curve. They're actually merged together into a single piece of geometry. So the way we deal with this is we create what's called a tripart brush. So where these stitches here are insert mesh brushes along a curve that don't blend, these straps are tripart brushes. These are of an insert mesh along a curve that blends into a single piece of geometry as you draw it. So other examples of this, if we switch back to our sphere here, B for brush, I for insert. If we go to Imm Army curve, for example, and go to the meshes, you can see we've got the hose reinforced. This, oops, that's too big. Let's turn our draw size down and draw it again. That's an example of a tripart brush. This is an insert mesh brush that duplicates itself and merges along a curve. There's many, many examples of these. If we go back to the B for brush, I for insert, there's Imm curve, and there's many other examples in here. You can see that we've got those stitches that we looked at before. Those continue along a curve. These are separate pieces, though. This is different than, for example, the chain with base. As you can see, that has three parts. If we click and drag, it draws one base, draws the chain, and then draws the last base at the end of the stroke, like so. So I want to show you how we create a tripart brush like that. So let's go ahead and clear our workspace, and we'll start looking at that. So let's begin by going to our tool palette, selecting a polymesh star, drawing it on the canvas, and then going into edit mode. I'm going to go to the gizmo, change this to a polycube. I'm happy with the polycube. Let's go ahead and squash this and stretch it. Oops, stretch it in X. This is going to be our leather strap. So I'm going to go to my subtool menu and I will duplicate that. I will now create a ring 3D primitive from that, which we will accept and then move over to the side here. Now I'm going to duplicate that across to the other side. So I'll go to Z plugin, subtool master, and click mirror. I'm going to leave merge into one subtool selected and x-axis selected. So what that'll do is that will copy this tool across to the other side and merge it into one subtool, like you see here. Great, now I'm going to duplicate the leather strap again, and on this new copy I'm going to move it over. I am going to scale it down, thicken it, move it up. I just want to have a leather tab that serves as a point of attachment between the ring and the strap. Because there's no subdivision levels on this, I can Control Shift click and drag to duplicate this over to the opposite side like this. Now in my subtool menu, I'm going to merge all of these down. Merge down, merge down. And here we go. So now I've got this as my basic piece of geometry. I'm going to create what's called a tripart brush now. I'm going to create a brush that draws this first at the beginning of my curve. Oops, let's turn off that X symmetry. It draws this at the beginning of the curve. Then it will repeat this strap along the length of the curve, and then it will end the curve with this piece. So to specify which piece is which, we need to give it three different polygroups. So I'm going to go to Polygroup and click Group Visible. Invert visibility here. Let's hide this. Group Visible. So now I have three separate polygroups. Now I need to store this as an insert mesh. Now if we're going to store something that draws along a curve, we need to not only decide on the orientation of the mesh against the background. You remember that determines the position of the model as it's drawn on the surface. We also need to consider the position on the curve. So the curve here, consider it running from the top of the screen to the bottom. So I'm going to orient the strap like this so it draws along the curve in this orientation, long ways, as the strap should. So now I'm going to go to Brush, Create Insert Mesh, make a new one. Now I've got a tool that draws a strap like that. but I need to enable it now to work in curve mode. So I'm going to come up here to stroke, tear that menu off, go to curve mode here, turn it on. Now I'm going to click and drag. Now I'm going to turn my draw size up and click that curve so we can see it. You can see it draws the first polygroup first, then it duplicates the second polygroup along the curve, and then ends with the last polygroup. However, the pieces aren't merged together. So what we need to do is we go to the brush menu, come down here to modifiers. Here you see that triparts is already turned on because it saw that it has 3 polygroups. It knew to turn that on. So now we'll turn on weld points. I'll click the curve, and those points now weld together. So look at that. Now we get this nice curve that runs the metal eyelet down the length of the strap and terminates with a metal eyelet. So let's go to our tools here and open up a polysphere. Delete our subdivision levels. And watch this. Let's draw our strap along the curve. On the stroke menu, snap is turned on, so it's snapping to the surface. Now let's say I want to continue my stroke. I'll just mouse over here towards the end of the stroke, and as I get close to it, I'll get this little red dash. That lets me know I can continue the stroke by just clicking and dragging. Now if I want to lock the start point, I can do that. So what that means is that start point there is locked in space, so I can now move the end of the strap. This is great if you want to make something feel like it's dangling off in space or hanging from something. Locking the start point makes it a lot easier to do that. You can move it all around and shake it, and that start point will not move. You could lock the end point, and that'll keep those points in space, and then you can adjust sort of the flow of the strap between them. Now if I move my mouse away so it becomes red, and then change my draw size, and then click the curve, it'll increase or decrease the size of the strap, depending on whether or not I increase or decrease the size of my brush. And as I'm mousing along this curve, I can change my draw size, and that's only going to affect my brush or my curve brush here. If I move away, you see my brush size changes back to normal with the red. If I move over the blue, it restores itself to the same brush size that I use for my curve brush. There we go. Now, if you want something to taper along the curve, go to Curve Modifiers, turn on Size, and then open your Curve Fall Off. If I click the curve now, it will go from small to normal size. I can change how small it gets by adjusting this endpoint on the curve, like so. I can flip it vertically so it goes from big to small, like this. And that works great for tentacles and spikes and anything like that. Now if you want to save that brush, go to Brush, Save As, and you can save that for later use. So that's how you create a tripart brush. It's basically an insert mesh brush that works along a curve and merges the geometry as it's drawn. So there's really no limit to the things that you can create this way. You can create zippers, ropes, teeth, any type of object that you would want to have repeated along the length of a curve. You can do that, even if that geometry needs to be merged together into one unified stroke. So hopefully this has been useful to you. I think these are very, very powerful tools, and I think you're going to really enjoy bringing them into your workflow. I'll see you in the next video.